Keep listening for This Just In from Outdoors Environmental News from the Monterey Bay, only on KZSC Santa Cruz.
KZSC.
Now, young fellas, been having a lot of fun around here today, haven't you? You know what makes this all possible? This forest around us. We should all be thankful for our forest.
You're tuned in to This Just In from Outdoors. Thanks. Stay tuned for news about a lawsuit filed against the state over fishing gear entangling whales, an effort to have trains carry oil from San Luis Obispo County that recently failed, and the effects of climate change on sudden oak death syndrome and on the population of ticks. Plus, headlines, a calendar of events, and more. Stick around.
This Just In from Outdoors.
The death toll has risen to 42 in the massive fires that raged through Santa Rosa, Napa, and Sonoma over the last week. A new report from the National Wildfire Federation says that California can expect more of these fires in the years to come. Researchers from the organization say the fire season is now 50 days longer than it was in 1979. It also predicts that some areas will see year-round fires. The executive director at the nonprofit Conservation and Planning League, Howard Penn, said suburban sprawl has led millions of Californians to move into areas at high risk for fire. The report blames much of the fires on dry conditions linked to climate change and called for more funding, prescribed burns to clear out the excess dry brush that grew after last year's unusually wet winter. According to Shannon Hayek-Williams, a climate and energy policy advisor for the National Wildfire Federation, the U.S. Forest Fire Service is spending about $1 billion a year fighting blazes, which is over half the agency's budget, and the number is growing quickly. The report also found that more than 8.5 million acres have burned in the United States so far this year, and the area burned annually in the Southwest has increased by 1,200% over the past 40 years. The fires have reached Santa Cruz, as Highway 1 was shut down for a mile north of Western Boulevard, while Santa Cruz and CAL FIRE crews doused a roughly quarter-mile wildfire that climbed a grassy hillside. Fire was put out shortly after air support arrived at about 12:45 p.m. Ground crews cleared a fire line up the hillside as traffic backed up for the miles north and south of the closure. Red retardants covered the hillside where the fire's progress was abruptly stopped. Santa Cruz police reported about 3 p.m. that the northbound lane of Highway 1 was reopened. In the Bay Area, where affordable housing is already scarce, the fires have caused a surge in homelessness, as well as sharp rise in demand for rental units. The price gouging law protects against landlords capitalizing on the heightened vulnerability of tenants. California's statewide tenants' rights organization warned on Wednesday that double-digit rent increases following recent wildfires violate Penal Code 396, the state's anti-price gouging laws. The cap on rent increase was triggered by the governor's declaration of state of emergency in 9 counties due to wildfires.
The octopus is a master of disguise, altering not only its coloration and patterning, but also its surface texture to be smooth like sand or bumpy like gravel. Cornell University mechanical engineer James Peekul says the animals use muscles to tighten and loosen areas of skin to make them bulge or dip. In the journal Science, he and his colleagues report using inflatable sheets of rubber to model the octopus skin.
But to prevent the rubber from just becoming a sphere, which happens, as you know, from balloons, we patterned an extensible material onto it. And when we inflated that balloon, we could control which parts protruded and which parts didn't.
That material is a programmable mesh that can tense or relax like a muscle. The goal is products that could change their surface properties, like wind drag or light reflectance.
Decades of illegal marijuana cultivation has left many Northern California watersheds in critical condition. Over the years, thousands of rogue pot growers have set up their operations among California's redwoods, diverting natural stream flow, clear-cutting forests, and contaminating soil with large amounts of fertilizers and pesticides. The dammed rivers, piles of trash, and toxic soil left behind by these criminal cultivators have decimated many coastal stream habitats, pushing endangered fish species like coho and steelhead closer to extinction. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife recently announced plans to spend $1.5 million on watershed restoration projects in 6 counties, including Sonoma, Mendocino, and Humboldt. This plan, known as the Cannabis Restoration Grant Program, is focused on restoring stream habitat damaged by illegal cannabis cultivation. To learn more about this program, I spoke to Matt Wells, who oversees watershed restoration projects for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife.
The problem is a lot of these illegal sites are being shut down, but the infrastructure is not being removed. There's a lot of trash left behind, and that's what this grant program is really addressing. It's truly alarming what's happened in the past, 5-10 years, and we're really hoping that it sort of plateaus in terms of the damage being done and that we can turn some of it around.
This large-scale restoration project may be the first of many in Northern California. State officials estimate tax revenue from recreational marijuana sales will generate close to $1 billion a year, 20% of which is dedicated to future watershed restoration projects.
Some hibiscus, daisies, and other flowers have blue and ultraviolet rings at the center of their petals. Now, scientists think these blue halos are caused by mutations to the flower's molecular structure that changes how light is scattered. They write in the journal Nature that this makes it easier for pollinators like bees to find them.
In many different species of flowers, we can observe disordered structures, and it really helps the bee to spot the flowers, and so we think it's somehow optimized and co-evolved with different species.
In a series of experiments, University of Cambridge chemist Silvia Vignolini and her colleagues showed that bees located artificial replicas of blue halos more easily than identical replicas without the blue halos. Backyard bird feeding has been popular in the United Kingdom since the late Victorian era. Now, researchers report in Science magazine that the pastime could be driving the evolution of longer beaks in birds called great tits. University of Sheffield evolutionary geneticist John Slate says the birds' bills have increased in length in the UK in recent years and are longer than those in the nearby Netherlands, where backyard feeders are less common.
And we also showed that those birds that have the genes for longer bills tended to rear more chicks successfully than the birds with shorter bills. So it looks like there's some kind of advantage to having longer bills that's associated with the use of bird feeders, perhaps.
The researchers are now looking into why bird feeding might lead to the evolution of longer bills. Many mountains of the Pacific Northwest are 30% lower than they should be, and according to a study in geomorphology, the culprit is salmon, who once migrated by the tens of millions upriver to their ancestral mountain streams. Indiana University geologist Brian Unitas explains that female salmon energetically clear their spawning area of excess gravel and rocks.
What it does is it allows the river to export that sediment and expose the underlying bedrock to the river erosive power, right, that can then cut down and incise into that bedrock more efficiently than if the salmon weren't there.
The researchers calculated that over millions of years, the salmon could have eroded the mountains by hundreds or even thousands of feet, an example of how organisms can reshape the very bedrock of the planet.
A highly contagious disease that has already killed millions of rural California trees is spreading into urban areas in the East Bay and the peninsula. The sudden oak death pathogen is a fungus-like invader that first emerged in 1995 and migrated to California from Asia, and was recently found in 13% of all samples from the central coast of California. Popular local destinations have already been affected, including the UC Santa Cruz Arboretum, the UC Berkeley campus and botanical gardens, and the Presidio. This trend is worrisome, forcing once untouched areas to face disease impacts and management decisions. The pathogen spreads naturally through water, such as rain splashes and contaminated creeks, and was boosted by last winter's exceptionally wet weather conditions.
Commercial Dungeness crab gear used in the upcoming California fishing season sometimes entangles, injures, and kills threatened and endangered humpback whales, blue whales, and sea turtles. Because California's state wildlife agency has failed to set rules for the crab fishing gear that could prevent these harms, the Center for Biological Diversity sued the California Department of Fish and Wildlife recently. Annie Roth looked into the issue and the lawsuit.
Right now, California's fishermen are gearing up for the 2017 Dungeness crab season. On November 15th, Fishermen from Mendocino to Monterey will begin dropping thousands of crab traps along California's coast, creating a gauntlet for endangered whales and sea turtles. The number of whales caught in fishing gear on the west coast of the United States has doubled in the last 2 years. There were 71 reported cases of whale entanglement on the west coast in 2016, 66 of which occurred in California's waters. All 71 cases involved an endangered whale species and American fishing gear. Entanglement is usually a death sentence for whales. The most common cause of death for entangled whales is drowning. Those who don't drown face starvation, disease, and infection. Last year, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife released a best practices guide, which contained a set of guidelines fishermen can follow to prevent whale entanglement. Fishermen are not legally required to follow these guidelines, and most of them don't. Many conservation groups are unsatisfied with the lack of regulation in California's crab fishery, including the Oakland Center for Biological Diversity, who are currently suing the California Department of Fish and Wildlife over the entanglement of 21 endangered whales in 2016. The Oakland Center for Biological Diversity argues that by not legally requiring fishermen to practice whale-safe crab fishing, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife are in violation of the Endangered Species Act. To learn more about this lawsuit, I spoke to Steve Jones from the Oakland Center for Biological Diversity.
This is a case where the law clearly prevents what's happening, but it's being ignored. So the only way to see that it's enforced at this point is to file a lawsuit. We really hope, honestly, that the lawsuit never gets heard in court on its merits, because we hope that the department will see this as an opportunity to finally address this problem. And we think there's a number of common sense changes they can make that would cause us to drop our lawsuit.
One of the common sense changes the Oakland Center for Biological Diversity is calling for involves preventing crab fishing in whale hotspots.
So in areas where we know there are whales, we want to see a reduction of the number of lines in the water. These lines create this deadly minefield for these whales. They just can't keep dodging all these lines. We would like to see some of the practices that are identified by the working group in a best practices guide actually implemented in more of a regulatory way.
To put it simply, the Oakland Center for Biological Diversity wants the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to legally require fishermen to follow the fishing practices outlined in their best practices guide. Their request for increased regulation in California's crab fishery sounds simple enough until you consider the people affected by these regulations. If there is one thing fishermen hate, it's regulation. Last crab season was disappointing for many California crabbers. Domoic acid shortened the fishing season and left consumers skeptical of seafood. There are many local crab fishermen who claim additional limits on their fishing will put them out of business. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife has not commented on the lawsuit, citing a policy that prohibits discussing ongoing litigation. According to Jones, settlement talks between the conservation group and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife have not been successful, and the case will likely go to court.
A study in Kenya conducted by UC Santa Barbara scientists has found that wildlife loss and climate change will lead to more ticks carrying harmful fevers in the country. Kendra Lee from our sister station, KCSB Santa Barbara, explains what this means for the future in Kenya and in our backyards.
In what's being called Earth's sixth mass extinction, we are witnessing the ongoing extinction of wildlife and plants due mainly to human forces such as overpopulation, climate change, and the overexploitation of natural resources. This ecosystem imbalance is likely to have an effect on humans as well. A new study by a graduate student from UCSB's Department of Ecology, Evolution, and Marine Biology has found that wildlife loss and climate change are likely to increase the amount of ticks carrying certain fevers harmful to humans. Georgia Titcomb, the lead author on the study, has been working in Kenya for the past 3 years simulating different climate conditions and amounts of wildlife. I spoke with Georgia to find out more about her work.
We've been working out here in Kenya at Impala Research Center. There's a fantastic set of exclosure plots that have been in place for nearly a decade now. And those plots, named the Uhuru exclosures, have basically simulate different levels of wildlife loss using animal exclosures. And we basically replicate this across different rainfall gradients within the research center. And this rainfall gradient simulates the warming and drying climate that is we're seeing here in Kenya as climate change is progressing.
What are you finding from these simulations?
In each of these different treatments, at least in terms of our study, we found this kind of gradual increase in the number of ticks, and there was just a really high abundance of these ticks in our full herbivore exclosures.
Georgia explains that this abundance of ticks will increase the possibility of humans coming into contact with these ticks, making it more likely for humans to succumb to a tick-borne fever.
In this study, we also screen these ticks genetically to look for what pathogens they may have. And what we found was that we didn't actually see a change in the prevalence of the pathogen within the ticks. So that's the proportion of ticks that are infected with something. But just by virtue of having more ticks, the risk of coming into contact with a pathogen is much higher because you have more ticks.
While the tick-borne fevers of Kenya, where the study took place, are different from those in the United States, these ticks do have a similar life cycle to others found in the U.S.
Well, we actually found a number of diseases that are relevant to the Western Hemisphere. In terms of relevance for the United States, we didn't find, obviously there's no Lyme disease out here in Kenya, and but I think the implications are similar if we're talking about the vector, which is the tick, and host biology. So the ticks that we are looking at here have a similar life cycle to many of the ticks that we also find in the United States.
If climate change and wildlife loss continues at the pace it's on now, Kenya's future will involve many more ticks. While this fate isn't certain for the rest of the world, these human-caused changes will have different consequences for different regions. Georgia argues that ecologists need to consider many dimensions and areas of study to understand the future to come.
I think one of the important things to consider in this is that we have really looked at how climate and wildlife loss interact. So there are these two major changes that humans are imposing on our world, and the fact that the two of them together can interact to really have the synergistic effect of increasing tick abundance in this case is important to consider. Climate change across the world is likely to be multi-directional. So here in Kenya, we're facing this warming, drying situation, but other parts of the world may be looking at a wetter sort of future in their climate projections. So I think it's really going to be a more localized effect, but to always consider the fact that there are likely to be multiple human-caused stressors and effects on our environment, and it's important for us ecologists to really consider that rather than just studying one thing.
Phillips 66, a multinational energy company, recently dropped its efforts to build a rail line in San Luis Obispo County that would have allowed the transport of crude oil by train up and down the California coast. KCSB's Kendra Lee spoke with Alicia Rossler, who is a staff attorney at the Environmental Defense Center, to find out more.
Starting around 2015, Phillips 66 applied for a coastal development permit in the county of San Luis Obispo for its project, which was to extend a rail spur for the Santa Maria refinery located in Nipomo in order to enable them to run trains, these huge oil trains that are about 80 cars long, that extend for around over a mile. And they wanted to have about 5 of these trains going up and down our coast and bringing oil to load and unload at this facility in Nipomo.
These trains traveling up and down the coast would have risked the health of the environment and coastal communities near these train tracks.
There was a ton of impacts to special status, like rare species and wildlife like the burrowing owl and chaparral and other native plants, as well as several health and safety impacts from air pollution and from hazards associated with these trains that are sort of like these giant rolling bombs going through our community up and down our coastline. And so we joined the local community, we being Environmental Defense Center. We represented ourselves, Surfrider, Center for Biological Diversity, and Stand.com in to oppose the project throughout the whole process, which is the Planning Commission and in front of the Board of Supervisors.
The San Luis Obispo County Board of Supervisors denied the project in March of 2017 for the potential risks to environmentally sensitive habitat areas as well as to human health. Phillips then filed a lawsuit alleging that the county had improperly determined that environmentally sensitive habitat areas existed on the project site.
And they specifically disputed finding that there was environmentally sensitive habitats on their property. And that designation specifically is meaningful because once the Coastal Commission or a local permitting agency like the county decides that you have environmentally sensitive habitats, then you can't develop in that area. It's completely and fully protected. So they filed a lawsuit, and we opposed them alongside with the county. And essentially what just happened is we've been fighting this lawsuit over the last year, and we filed several motions to dismiss and have been successful. And instead of opposing this last motion to dismiss, which would have gotten rid of all of their claims, they decided to dismiss their own case. And so we are celebrating a victory because this gets rid of this project, this terrible proposal that would have brought these huge trains up and down our coast once and for all.
The county received comments and petitions from more than 25,000 Californians opposed to the Phillips Rail Spur project, and letters from more than 45 cities, counties, and school boards urging the county to deny the crude by rail proposal. The Phillips 66 rail terminal would have allowed more than 7 million gallons of crude oil to be shipped via rail to its local refinery each week. Trains servicing the Phillips 66 project would have traveled from the north and south through hundreds of major California cities as well as smaller communities, including Santa Barbara, Ventura, Los Angeles, Sacramento, Davis, Berkeley, Oakland, and San Jose.
Is really a significant victory for our community. There has been a huge increase nationally with importing and exporting and transporting oil by rail. It's at least 5 fewer trains up and down our coast, and hopefully we won't see any more of these, but it's very likely we will. So hopefully people can keep their eye out for it and keep the community galvanized for any future proposals.
Right now, during our Friday evening broadcast and lasting till 8 p.m., Alta Organic Coffee and Tea is hosting a free talk by Ricky Erickson of the California Marine Sanctuary Foundation. Erickson will be speaking about some of the new marine protected areas along the California coast, which now number 29 within the Monterey Bay Sanctuary alone. On Saturday morning, October 28th, Save Our Shores and the American Fisheries Society are hosting a fun day on the River Walk of the San Lorenzo. You can volunteer to clean up our local river and learn more about the issue of pollution in Santa Cruz water systems. From 10 a.m. to noon on Saturday, the group will be cleaning the section of the San Lorenzo River from Water Street to Soquel Avenue. Check-in will be on the River Walk across the street from Regal Riverfront Cinemas near the pedestrian bridge. If you have any questions, please contact cleanup@saveourshores.org. Sunday at 1:30 p.m., the Wetlands of Watsonville offer a free guided nature tour of one of the largest remaining freshwater wetlands in the central coast of California, featuring muskrats, bobcats, and tree frogs, and over 200 species of birds. The free guided nature walks are offered every Sunday through the Watsonville Nature Center, located at the back of Ramsey Park at 30 Harkins Slough Road. No reservations are required and families with children are welcome. While binoculars are provided, you should bring water, sunscreen, and comfortable shoes and dress for weather. The CSU Monterey Bay hosts a startup hackathon at the Institute for Innovation and Economic Development starting on Friday, November 3rd at 4 p.m. Teams will compete to develop new technology-based solutions to aid in preparing for surviving and recovering from natural disasters. Computer engineers and designers will mentor the teams during the weekend, who will present a prototype to a team of judges on Sunday. Space is limited. Pre-registration is required. Contact innovation at csumb.edu for more information. Thanks for tuning in to This Just In from Outdoors. Check out our stories and past shows online at newsfromoutdoors.org. I've been your host, Maddie Kringle. Our headlines were produced by Jordan Penland, Daniel Martinez, and Bob Hirshorn of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Annie Roth produced the story on the Center for Biological Diversity's lawsuit. Kendra Lee from our sister station at KCSB in Santa Barbara produced the pieces on the Phillips 66 oil train proposal and on the research study on ticks and climate change. Tyler Harris and Keith Rosendahl produced the calendar of events. Thanks again for listening. We'll be here next Friday at 5:30 for another edition. Until then, we'll see you outdoors.
Did you know that Santa Cruz County is home to dozens of online news and views publications put out by dedicated local citizens and professional journalists? Needful News makes it one-click convenient to stay current with local, state, and national news and to stay in touch with your elected representatives. You can exercise your mind and your citizenship on the web by typing needful.news into your web browser.
Just bees and things and flowers. Just bees and things and flowers. Sunshine.
Now, young fellas, been having a lot of fun around here today, haven't you? You know what makes this all possible? This forest around us. We should all be thankful for our forest.
This Just In from Outdoors.